Santa Monica Beach, a Saturday afternoon that was supposed to belong only to his son. Daniel Carter walked back from the drink stand, 2 bottles of water in hand, and stopped cold. A woman sat beside Ethan on the sand, helping him shape a sand castle. She looked up. Elizabeth Moore, his boss, the COO who never smiled in meetings. But here, with bare feet and windswept hair, she looked at him and said something that would crack open everything he had buried for 4 years. You look at your son as if he's the only thing you have left in this world. But is that fair to him? Daniel did not answer. He could not. The words hid somewhere deep in a place he had locked away the day he buried his wife. Elizabeth Moore stood before him, not in the tailored blazer she wore in boardrooms, not with the cold precision that made junior executives avoid her gaze. Here she was, just a woman with sand on her feet and something unreadable in her eyes. She glanced once more at Ethan, who was still focused on his sand castle, oblivious to the weight of the moment passing between the two adults. Then, she offered a small nod, almost an apology, and walked away down the shoreline. Daniel watched her disappear into the crowd of weekend beachgoers. His hands were still holding the 2 water bottles, the plastic warm now from his grip. Ethan called out to him, asking for help with a tower that kept collapsing, and Daniel forced himself to move to kneel beside his son to pretend that nothing had changed. But something had. He could feel it like a crack in glass, invisible at first, spreading slowly outward. 4 years. That was how long it had been since the accident. 4 years since the phone call that split his life into before and after. His wife Sarah had been driving home from her sister's house on a rainy November night. A truck ran a red light. The doctor said she died on impact, which was supposed to be a comfort. It was not. Daniel had been at home putting Ethan to bed, reading him a story about a bear who lost his way in the forest. By the time he finished the last page, his wife was already gone, and he did not even know it. After the funeral, Daniel made a decision. He would not take risks. He would not chase promotions or new opportunities. He would not date, would not travel, would not do anything that might disrupt the fragile stability he had built around himself and his son. His job as a data engineer at a tech company in Los Angeles paid well enough. The work was predictable. He clocked in. He clocked out. He picked Ethan up from school. He made dinner. He checked homework. He went to bed. The routine became his religion. Stability was everything. He had no right to gamble when Ethan depended on him. Elizabeth Moore existed in a different universe. She was the chief operating officer 3 levels above him in the company hierarchy. In meetings, she spoke in clipped sentences and never wasted words. People respected her. People feared her. Daniel had heard rumors about her personal life, fragments of gossip exchanged in break rooms. A divorce years ago, a daughter she never mentioned. But he had never spoken to her directly, not beyond a polite nod in the elevator or a formal greeting at company events. She was his boss in the most distant sense of the word. Until today, Ethan tugged at his sleeve, pulling him back to the present. The boy held up a small shell, white and perfectly spiraled, and announced that it was a gift for his collection. Daniel smiled the kind of smile he had practiced so many times. It came automatically now. He told Ethan it was beautiful. He helped finish the sandcastle. He bought ice cream from a vendor walking past. He did all the things a good father was supposed to do. But Elizabeth's words kept circling in his mind, relentless as the tide. You look at your son as if he is the only thing you have left in this world. But is that fair to him? What did she mean by that? Was she criticizing him, pitying him? Or had she seen something that he himself refused to acknowledge? Daniel did not know. He only knew that no one had ever said anything like that to him before. Friends told him he was doing a great job. His mother said he was strong. His coworkers admired how he balanced work and single parenthood. Everyone praised him for surviving. No one asked if surviving was the same as living. The drive home was quiet. Ethan fell asleep in the back seat, his face still flushed from the sun, the shell clutched in his small fist. Daniel kept the radio off. He needed the silence. The apartment was waiting for them in downtown Los Angeles, a modest 2-bedroom unit that he had moved into after selling the house he once shared with Sarah. Too many memories in that house. Too many rooms that echoed with her absence. The apartment was smaller, simpler, easier to manage. It was enough. He carried Ethan inside, changed him into pajamas without waking him, and tucked him into bed. The boy murmured something about the sandcastle, then turned over and sank deeper into sleep. Daniel stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of his son's breathing. This was his purpose. This was his reason for getting up each morning. Ethan was everything. But is that fair to him? Daniel walked to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He drank it, standing at the sink, staring out the window at the city lights below. His reflection looked back at him in the dark glass, tired and hollow. 38 years old, widowed, a father, a provider, a man who had stopped living the day his wife died and had been merely existing ever since. He had told himself it was sacrifice. He had told himself it was love. Now he was not so sure. Sleep did not come easily that night. Daniel lay in bed, eyes open, replaying the scene on the beach over and over. Elizabeth's face, her voice, the way she had looked at Ethan, not with the casual interest of a stranger, but with something deeper, something that looked almost like grief. He wondered what her story was. He wondered why she had been alone on that beach, why she had stopped to help a child build a sandcastle, why she had said those words to a man she barely knew. Around 2:00 the morning, he gave up on sleep and got out of bed. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. He walked to Ethan's room and pushed the door open gently just to check on him. The boy was still asleep, sprawled across the mattress in that boneless way children have. But something on the small desk by the window caught Daniel's attention. A drawing. He crossed the room and picked it up, tilting it toward the light from the hallway. Ethan loved to draw. He drew constantly, filling sketchbooks with pictures of dinosaurs and superheroes and imaginary worlds. But this drawing was different. It showed a beach wave sketched in blue crayon sand in yellow and brown. A single figure stood at the edge of the water. A man alone. He was facing the ocean, his back to the viewer, and there was something in his posture that made Daniel's chest tighten. Clear his throat. The man looked lonely. The man looked lost. There was no child in the picture, no Ethan running through the waves, no father and son building castles together, just one solitary figure staring out at an endless sea. Daniel set the drawing down with trembling hands. His son had not drawn a family. His son had drawn his father's loneliness. An 8-year-old boy had seen what Daniel had spent 4 years trying to hide and had captured it in crayon on a piece of paper. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He leaned against the desk, breathing hard, fighting the urge to wake Ethan and hold him and apologize for something the boy probably did not even understand. What was he teaching his son? That life was something to be endured, not enjoyed. That safety mattered more than happiness. That love was dangerous. That hope was foolish. That the best you could do was survive until the end. Daniel thought about his own childhood, about his father, who worked 60-hour weeks and never complained about his mother, who smiled through her exhaustion and called it duty. He had inherited their philosophy. He had made it his own, and now he was passing it on to Ethan. This legacy of quiet resignation, this belief that wanting more was selfish. Elizabeth's second question echoed in his mind. But is that fair to him? No. The answer was immediate and undeniable. It was not fair. Ethan deserved a father who laughed without forcing it, who took chances, who showed him that life could be an adventure and not just a series of obligations. Ethan deserved to see his father happy, not just functional, not just present. Happy. Daniel stood in his son's room until the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the window. He thought about Elizabeth Moore and the strange encounter on the beach. He thought about the drawing on the desk. He thought about all the years he had spent building walls around himself, convincing himself that isolation was protection. And for the first time in 4 years, he asked himself a question he had been too afraid to consider. What if he was wrong? The choice was there waiting for him. He could ignore what had happened, dismiss Elizabeth's words as the random observation of a stranger, go back to his routines and his rules and his careful, controlled existence. Or he could let this moment be a turning point. He could allow himself to feel something again, to risk something again, to live something again. The thought terrified him, but the drawing on Ethan's desk terrified him more. Daniel left the room as quietly as he had entered, pulling the door closed behind him. He did not have answers yet. He did not know what to do next, but he knew with a certainty that surprised him that something had shifted. The crack in the glass was spreading, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to let the light in. Monday morning arrived with the harsh fluorescent lights of the office and the familiar hum of computers. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at spreadsheets he had seen 1,000 times before, but his mind kept drifting back to the beach, to Elizabeth, to the words she had spoken. He had spent the entire weekend turning them over in his head, examining them from every angle, trying to understand why a woman he barely knew had been able to see through him so completely. When he passed her in the hallway that afternoon, she gave him a brief nod, professional and distant, as if nothing had happened. He returned the gesture. Neither of them mentioned Santa Monica. The company had strict policies about workplace relationships, especially between executives and their subordinates. Daniel had read the employee handbook when he was first hired, skimming past the sections on harassment and fraternization with the vague confidence of someone who assumed such rules would never apply to him. Now, those policies loomed in his mind like warning signs. Elizabeth was the chief operating officer. He was a mid-level engineer. If anyone even suspected that something personal had passed between them, the consequences could be severe. For him, it might mean losing his job. For her, it could mean losing everything she had built. Weeks passed. Daniel threw himself into his work, staying late, volunteering for extra projects, doing everything he could to prove his value. He told himself it was about job security, about providing for Ethan, but part of him knew the truth. He was trying to stay close to her, to catch glimpses of her in meetings, to hear her voice during conference calls. It was foolish. It was dangerous. And he could not stop. Elizabeth maintained her distance with flawless precision. In group meetings, she addressed him the same way she addressed everyone else, with crisp efficiency and no trace of familiarity. When their paths crossed in the elevator or the parking garage, she offered nothing more than a polite greeting. But sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, Daniel caught her watching him. There was something in her eyes that he could not name. Recognition, maybe, or understanding, as if she too was carrying a weight that no one else could see. The invitation came on a Thursday evening 3 weeks after the beach. Daniel was packing up his laptop when his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was Elizabeth. She wanted to meet to discuss a data project, something about quarterly metrics that needed his expertise. She suggested a coffee shop in Malibu, away from the office, where they could talk without interruption. Daniel read the message twice. He knew it was not really about the project. He said yes anyway. The coffee shop was small and quiet, tucked between a surf shop and an art gallery on the Pacific Coast Highway. Daniel arrived first, choosing a table by the window where he could watch the sunset paint the ocean in shades of orange and gold. Elizabeth walked in 15 minutes later, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, looking nothing like the formidable executive who commanded boardrooms with a single glance. She ordered a black coffee and sat across from him, and for a while they did talk about work numbers and deadlines and projections, safe topics, professional topics. But the conversation kept drifting, pulled by some invisible current toward deeper waters. Elizabeth was the first to cross the line. She set down her cup and looked at him directly, and Daniel saw something shift in her expression, a softening that he had never witnessed before. She told him that she had been thinking about their encounter on the beach, about what she had said to him. She had not planned to say it. The words had simply come out, as if spoken by someone else. She did not apologize, but she wanted him to understand why. Her story came out in pieces, not all at once, but in fragments that slowly assembled into a picture. 10 years ago, she had been married. She had a daughter, a girl who was 6 years old at the time, bright and curious, and full of laughter. But Elizabeth was climbing the corporate ladder with relentless ambition, working 70-hour weeks, missing school plays and birthday parties and bedtime stories. Her husband asked her to slow down. She refused. The marriage collapsed under the weight of her absence, and when the divorce was finalized, her husband was awarded primary custody. He argued successfully that Elizabeth was never home, that she did not know their daughter's teachers or friends or favorite foods. The court agreed. Elizabeth was given visitation rights that she rarely used because work always came first. Now her daughter was 16 years old and wanted nothing to do with her. They had not spoken in over a year. Elizabeth had sent birthday cards and Christmas gifts, all of which went unanswered. She had built an empire at work, earned the respect and fear of everyone beneath her accumulated wealth and power and prestige, and she had no one to share it with. She said the words without self-pity, stating them as facts. But Daniel heard the hollowness underneath. He recognized it because he carried the same emptiness inside himself. Daniel found himself talking, then saying things he had never told anyone. He told her about Sarah, about the night of the accident, about standing in their bedroom afterward and not knowing how to exist in a world where she was gone. He told her about the guilt that still gnawed at him, the irrational belief that he should have been the one driving that night, that if he had just offered to pick her up, everything would be different. He told her about Ethan, about how the boy had become his reason for breathing, his justification for continuing to move through each day. He had turned his son into a purpose, because without that purpose, he was not sure he would have survived. Elizabeth listened without interrupting. When he finished, she leaned forward and spoke with a quiet intensity that cut through all his defenses. She told him that she understood his fear. She understood, wanting to protect what little you had left, but she had learned too late that protection could become a prison. She had spent 15 years proving that she could succeed without anyone, and she had succeeded, but success meant nothing when there was no one there to celebrate with her. The corner office was just a room. The title was just words on a business card. She had traded her family for achievements, and she would never get that time back. Then she said something that would echo in Daniel's mind for weeks to come. She told him that he could not teach his son to live courageously if he himself had never lived courageously. Children did not learn from words. They learned from watching their parents. If Daniel spent his life hiding from risk, playing it safe, treating happiness as something dangerous, then that was what Ethan would learn. The boy would grow up believing that love was a threat to be avoided, that hope was foolish, that the best anyone could do was survive until the end. Daniel did not respond. He did not know how. The words hit too close to the truth he had been avoiding for 4 years. He thought about the drawing in Ethan's room, the lonely figure standing at the edge of the sea. He thought about all the smiles he had faked, all the joy he had performed, all the ways he had tried to be a good father while keeping his heart locked away. Elizabeth was right. He was not teaching his son to live. He was teaching him to endure. They stayed at the coffee shop until it closed, talking about things that had nothing to do with quarterly metrics. When they finally walked out into the cool night air, Elizabeth touched his arm briefly and told him that she was glad they had met on that beach. Daniel said he was glad, too. They did not kiss. They did not make promises. But something had shifted between them. Some barrier had fallen, and they both knew there was no going back. The changes in Ethan came gradually, so subtly, that Daniel almost missed them. The boy started asking questions he had never asked before. One evening, while Daniel was cooking dinner, Ethan looked up from his drawing and asked why his father never smiled when he was not around. The question was innocent, delivered in the matter-of-fact tone of a child who did not understand the weight of his own words. Daniel froze with a spatula in his hand, unsure how to answer. He told Ethan that he smiled all the time, but even as he said it, he knew it was a lie, and he suspected Ethan knew it, too. A few days later, Ethan presented him with a new drawing. Daniel took it carefully, expecting another dinosaur or superhero, but what he saw made his breath catch. It was another beach scene similar to the first one, with waves and sand and a wide blue sky. But this time there were two figures standing together. One was clearly meant to be Daniel, tall and dark-haired. The other was a woman with long hair, her face left blank because Ethan did not know who she was. Daniel asked his son who the woman was supposed to be. Ethan shrugged and said he did not know, but in the picture, his father was smiling. Daniel stared at the drawing for a long time after Ethan went to bed. His son was not just observing his loneliness anymore. His son was imagining something different. A future where Daniel was not alone. A future where he was happy. The realization was overwhelming. His 8-year-old child wanted to see him live, not just survive, and had expressed that hope in the only language he knew through crayon and paper, and a picture of two people standing together on a beach. The rumors started a week later. Daniel never found out who began them, though he had his suspicions. A coworker named Marcus, who had been passed over for a promotion that Elizabeth had approved, seemed to take particular pleasure in the whispers. People said that Daniel and the COO had been seen together outside the office. People said there was something going on between them. People said that favoritism was at play, that Daniel's recent project assignments were not based on merit, but on something far less professional. The gossip spread through the company like a virus, mutating with each retelling, growing more scandalous with every whisper. Human Resources called Daniel into a meeting. They asked questions that were carefully worded but unmistakably pointed. Had he ever met with Elizabeth Moore outside of work? Had their relationship ever crossed professional boundaries? Daniel answered honestly, telling them about the coffee shop in Malibu, about the project discussion that had been the official reason for the meeting. He did not mention the beach. He did not mention the conversations about loneliness and fear and the things they had lost. The HR representative nodded and took notes and thanked him for his cooperation. Daniel left the meeting, feeling like he had just walked through a minefield. The company was in the middle of a restructuring. Budget cuts were coming and layoffs were inevitable. Daniel had known this for months, had watched colleagues disappear one by one. Their desks cleared out overnight as if they had never existed. He had believed his job was secure. His performance reviews were strong. His projects were successful. But when the list of affected employees was announced, his name was on it. No explanation was given. No reason was offered. Just a form letter thanking him for his service and informing him that his position had been eliminated. Daniel sat in his car in the parking garage for an hour after receiving the news, unable to move. His mind raced through possibilities. Was this because of the rumors? Had Marcus reported him to HR out of spite? Or was it simply bad luck? Wrong place at wrong time? A name on a spreadsheet that someone decided to cut. He thought about calling Elizabeth, demanding answers, asking her why she had not protected him, but he already knew why. If she had intervened, if she had fought to keep him, it would have confirmed everything people were saying. Her silence was the only shield she could offer. It just wasn't enough. He drove home in a daze. Ethan was already asleep by the time he arrived, and Daniel stood in the doorway of his son's room, watching the boy breathe, feeling the full weight of his failure. He had tried to change. He had tried to open himself up to something new, and this was the result. His job was gone. His savings would last 3 months at most. The future he had carefully constructed, the stability he had sacrificed everything to maintain, had crumbled in a matter of weeks. He had risked, and he had lost. Daniel tried calling Elizabeth that night. The phone rang 5 times and went to voicemail. He did not leave a message. He called again the next morning, and again that afternoon. And each time, there was no answer. She was not ignoring him, he told himself. She was protecting both of them, but the silence felt like abandonment. And the loneliness he had lived with for 4 years came rushing back sharper than ever. He sat alone in his apartment that night, the lights off the city glowing outside his window. Ethan was asleep. The refrigerator hummed, and Daniel asked himself the question that had been forming in the back of his mind since the moment he received that termination letter. Had he made a mistake? Had his attempt to live differently, to feel something again, been the error that destroyed everything? Maybe the walls he had built were not a prison. Maybe they were protection. Maybe he should have stayed safe, stayed closed, stayed in the comfortable numbness that had carried him through the past 4 years. Maybe wanting more was the problem all along. The drawing Ethan had made sat on the kitchen counter, the one with 2 figures standing on the beach, one of them smiling. Daniel looked at it and felt nothing but exhaustion. He had tried to be the father in that picture. He had failed. And now he was right back where he started, except worse, because now he knew what hope felt like, and he knew what it felt like to have it taken away. The days blurred together. Daniel stopped counting them after the first week. He woke up, made breakfast, for Ethan walked him to the school bus, then returned to an empty apartment that seemed to grow smaller with each passing hour. He updated his resume. He scrolled through job listings. He sent applications into the void and waited for responses that rarely came. The tech industry was contracting companies tightening their belts, and a mid-level data engineer with no exceptional credentials was not exactly in high demand. His savings account showed a number that gave him 3 months, maybe 4 if he cut back on everything. After that, he did not know what would happen. The worst part was not the financial pressure. The worst part was the silence. Elizabeth had not called, had not texted, had not sent any signal that she remembered he existed. Daniel told himself he understood. She was protecting her position, maintaining distance to avoid further suspicion, doing what any rational person in her situation would do. But understanding did not make the loneliness easier. He had opened himself up for the first time in 4 years, allowed himself to feel something beyond the numb routine of survival, and now he was paying the price. The walls he had built were gone, and there was nothing left to shield him from the cold. Ethan sensed the change. Children always do, even when adults try to hide it. The boy became quieter, more watchful, his eyes following Daniel around the apartment with an expression that was too old for his 8 years. He stopped asking to go to the park. He stopped showing Daniel his drawings. He did his homework in silence and went to bed without complaint, as if he understood that his father was carrying something heavy and did not want to add to the burden. Daniel hated that. He hated that his son had learned to shrink himself to become invisible to accommodate a father who could not hold himself together. One night, unable to sleep, Daniel walked through the apartment in the dark. He passed the kitchen counter where Ethan's drawing still lay, the one with 2 figures on the beach, one of them smiling. He had not moved it since the night he lost his job. Part of him wanted to throw it away to erase the evidence of a hope that had only led to ruin. But he could not bring himself to do it. The drawing was proof that his son had imagined something better for him. Destroying it felt like destroying Ethan's faith. He wandered into the living room and stopped in front of the window. The city lights spread out below, millions of people living their own lives, fighting their own battles, carrying their own invisible weights. Daniel pressed his forehead against the cool glass and let himself feel the full depth of his failure. He had tried to change. He had tried to be brave. And here he was, jobless, alone, watching his savings drain away while his son learned to walk on eggshells around him. Maybe the old way was right. Maybe staying closed off, staying safe, staying in the comfortable prison of low expectations was the only way to survive. Maybe wanting more was the mistake. Elizabeth's words came back to him then, unbidden and unwelcome. You look at your son as if he is the only thing you have left in this world. But is that fair to him? He had thought about that question 1,000 times since she first asked it. He had thought he understood what she meant. But standing here in the dark, at the lowest point he had reached since Sarah's funeral, he suddenly saw it differently. The problem was not that he had changed. The problem was that he had not changed enough. He had taken a few tentative steps outside his walls, felt the first brush of sunlight, and then retreated at the first sign of storm. He was still living in fear, just a different kind of fear. The question that rose in his mind was not about Elizabeth, not about the job, not about the rumors or the layoffs or the 3 months of savings slowly ticking down. The question was about Ethan. How did Daniel want his son to remember him as a father who survived, who endured, who made it through each day by keeping his head down and his heart locked away, or as a father who lived, who took risks, who showed his son that failure was not the end of the world, and that courage meant getting back up after you fell? Daniel stood at the window for a long time, watching the city lights blur through the moisture gathering in his eyes. He thought about Sarah, about what she would say if she could see him now. She had always been the brave one, the one who pushed him to try new things, to take chances, to believe that life was an adventure worth having. He had buried that part of himself, along with her, convinced that safety was more important than joy. But Sarah had not married a man who played it safe. She had married someone who dreamed, who hoped, who believed in possibilities. He had forgotten that person. It was time to remember. The next morning, Daniel made a decision. He would not look for another job like the one he had lost. He would not go back to the same safe path, the same predictable routine, the same slow suffocation disguised as stability. Instead, he searched for something he had thought about years ago, back when Sarah was alive, and the future seemed full of promise. He found a small startup focused on children's education technology. They were looking for a data engineer. The salary was lower than what he had earned before. The company was young and uncertain, with no guarantee of success. It was exactly the kind of risk he had spent 4 years avoiding. He applied anyway. And then he did something even harder. He sat down with Ethan. The boy was at the kitchen table eating cereal when Daniel pulled out a chair and joined him. Ethan looked up with those watchful eyes waiting. And Daniel realized he had no idea how to begin. He had never talked to his son about adult problems. He had always believed that children should be protected from such things, shielded from the harsh realities of the world. But Ethan was not oblivious. Ethan had been carrying Daniel's pain alongside his own, and he deserved the truth. Daniel told his son that he had lost his job. He explained that he did not know exactly what would happen next, that there might be some difficult months ahead, that things might have to change. But he also told Ethan something else. He said that he was learning to be braver. He said that for a long time he had been so focused on keeping them safe that he had forgotten how to be happy. He said that he was trying to change that, and he hoped that someday Ethan would be proud of him for trying. Ethan listened without interrupting, his spoon forgotten in the bowl. When Daniel finished, the boy got up from his chair, walked around the table, and wrapped his arms around his father. He held on tight, his small body pressed against Daniel's chest. And when he finally spoke, his voice was muffled but clear. He said that he did not need his father to be perfect. He just needed his father to be happy. Daniel held his son and let the tears come. He cried for the years he had wasted, for the walls he had built, for the man he had been and the man he was trying to become. Ethan did not pull away. He just held on this 8-year-old boy who understood more about love and life than Daniel had given him credit for. It was the first time in 4 years that Daniel had cried in front of his son. It would not be the last. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth called. Daniel almost did not answer. He had given up expecting to hear from her, had accepted her silence as a final goodbye. But when he saw her name on the screen, he picked up the phone and said hello. And her voice on the other end sounded different than he remembered. Softer, less certain, almost vulnerable. She told him that she had resigned from the company. The news hit him like a physical shock. Elizabeth Moore, the woman who had built her entire identity around her career, who had sacrificed her marriage and her daughter for the corner office, had walked away from everything she had worked for. Daniel asked her why, and her answer came slowly, each word carrying the weight of years of regret. She said that when he was laid off, she had told herself that staying silent was the right thing to do. She had convinced herself that by not intervening, by not defending him, she was protecting both of them from worse consequences. But watching him walk out of that building, knowing she had done nothing to stop it, something broke inside her. She realized that she was repeating the same mistake she had made 10 years ago. She was choosing the safety of her position over doing what was right. She was choosing fear over courage, and she could not live with that anymore. Her silence had not been protection. She said it had been cowardice, and she did not want to be a coward any longer. So, she had submitted her resignation, cleaned out her office, and walked away from the title and the power and the corner office with the view of the city. She had also reached out to her daughter. The conversation had been awkward and painful, full of silences and unspoken accusations, but it was a start. For the first time in years, they were talking. That was more than Elizabeth had dared to hope for. Daniel listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished, he told her about the startup, about the application he had submitted, about the conversation with Ethan. He told her that he was trying to change, really change this time, not just crack the walls, but tear them down completely. Elizabeth said she was trying to do the same. Neither of them made promises. Neither of them knew what the future held. But they agreed to meet again, to keep talking, to see where this new path might lead. 6 months later, Daniel stood on Santa Monica Beach, with the sun warm on his face and the sound of waves filling his ears. He was working at the startup now. The salary was lower than his old job, but he woke up every morning with a sense of purpose he had not felt in years. The work mattered. The people mattered. He was building something that might help children learn and grow, and that felt more valuable than any quarterly report he had ever produced. Ethan ran across the sand, chasing seagulls, his laughter carried by the wind. Elizabeth sat beside Daniel on a blanket, watching the boy with a smile that reached her eyes. She had met her daughter twice in the past month. The relationship was still fragile, still marked by years of distance and disappointment. But they were talking. They were trying. That was all anyone could do. Ethan came running back with something in his hand. A new drawing folded into quarters, which he presented to Daniel with great ceremony. Daniel unfolded it carefully and felt his breath catch in his throat. It was another beach scene, but this time there were 3 figures standing together on the sand. One was Daniel, one was Ethan, and one was Elizabeth. All 3 of them were smiling. Daniel looked at his son, then at Elizabeth, then back at the drawing. He remembered the first picture Ethan had made, the one with a single lonely figure staring out at the sea. He remembered the second drawing with 2 people and a father who was finally smiling. And now this, 3 people, a family, or something like it, a future that none of them had planned, but all of them were building one day at a time. Elizabeth's words from that first day on the beach came back to him one last time. You look at your son, as if he is the only thing you have left in this world. He understood now what she had meant. Ethan was not the only thing he had left. Ethan was the reason to start living again. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes a single sentence spoken at the right moment could not change the past, but it could change everything that came after. Daniel had learned that lesson the hard way. He was grateful for every painful step of the journey. He folded the drawing carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Then he stood up, took Ethan's hand in one of his own, and Elizabeth's hand in the other, and walked toward the water. The sun was setting. The waves were gentle, and for the first time in 4 years, Daniel Carter was not just surviving, he was 5.